In Charak's famous medical compendium, Charak Samhita, which was authored around 1st to 2nd century CE, we have sections on debate and disputation as well. When we compare Charak's descriptions of jati or futilities, chal or quibbles with those found in the Nyaya Sutra, many definitions closely match. For instance, Dristant, Prayojan, Pratigya, or Vitand, these are exactly as per the Nyaya style definitions. But he also notes terms which are not there in Nyaya, for example, Pratigya Sthapan, Jigyasa, Vyavasay, Vakyashesh, Upalambh, Parihar, Abhyanujana, etc. And Nyaya has also some technical terms which are not in Charaka. So is it the case that Charaka is less technical and Nyaya is more technical? So the style of Charak's discussion of disputation is simpler and it is less technical than Nyaya's discussion, which is very heavily debate, which is very theoretical when we talk about the debate theory. And this suggests that both of them drew upon some earlier common source which codified disputation, out of which Charak preserved a less specialized and medical practical adaptation. And Nyaya represents a more technical formalization and which is geared towards professional debaters. So Charak is probably earlier. So while the present compilation of Nyaya Sutras is later, and it occurred at a time where formal debates became a central intellectual practice. And this also, fits into the idea that the fifth book of Nyaya, which is which catalogs fallacies and chals and quibbles and all those things, is a late insertion and which responded to the debate culture. We can analyze where Nyaya and Vaisheshik converge if we compare the doctrines, the Swatah Praman or the self validity of knowledge versus Paratah Praman, then we have a Khyati, which is the Mimamsa theory of error. And these major disputes with Mimamsa are not mentioned in the Nyaya Sutra. And they have, they arise separately in the Nyaya Mimamsa debates. Self-validity doctrine, Swatah Praman and eternality of sound are also not thematized strongly here, although later Nyaya sides with the non-eternality of sound. Then Nyaya and Vaisheshika, what do they share? They both share a realist ontology of substances, qualities, universals, inherence, etc. They both have a similar view on perception, that is soul, mind, sense, and cognition. Then we have some, in Nyaya, we have some additional emphasis on yoga and theism. So Nyaya Sutra explicitly mentions yoga methods. For instance, we have explicit sections on concentration, restraint of mind as aids to correct knowledge and liberation. And this is absent in Vaisheshik, the yoga element. And this is probably a later addition to Nyaya, which reflects integration with Patanjali yoga traditions. There was a Japanese scholar, Mirok, who he even suggested that Nyaya absorbed these elements from, Mahamahopadhyaya, Har Prasad Shastri. So he seems to suggest that Nyaya absorbed these from this person, Har Prasad Shastri. Nyaya alone brings in Ishvara as the dispenser of karma fruits. And early Vaisheshika had no explicit theism. It explained everything by Adrist and atoms. And now we have some differences on perception and samskar. So Vaisheshik Sutra describes perception as arising from close proximity of self, sense, and objects. It mentions samskar, which are disposition, residual impression in the sense of cognition. Uh, and Nyaya takes over this, and Nyaya gives a fuller analysis of samskar, udbhut roop, pratva, and which are the basically the technical details of how impressions arise. And Vaisheshika has a discussion on Vogpadya, which is simultaneity similar to Nyaya, but it's not developed well. So Nyaya gives three types of inference: Purvat, Sheshvat, and Samanito Drashta. But Vaisheshik doesn't know this threefold classification. It only mentions specific patterns like, inferring fire from smoke, air from touch. It doesn't give any special general theory. Then Vyapti, which is the invariable concomitance between Hetu and Sadhya, is of prime importance in later Nyaya, but it has not been systematically articulated in either the Nyaya or the Vaisheshik Sutra. Vaisheshik Sutra, it assumes that you know that there is fixed relation between the middle term and the major term, which is called Prasiddhi Purvakatva. But Vaisheshik doesn't turn that into a codified notion of Vyapti. So the technical apparatus of Nyaya inference, which is explicit Vyapti, formal distinction of three inference types, Purvat, Sheshvat, and Samanyato Drashta, detailed Hetva Bhasha classifications, they develop after the sutras in the classical Nyaya commentators who are Vatsayan, Udyogatara, etc. Uh, and then we have uh, so Nyaya make Nyaya focuses a lot on Vyapti, but in Vaisheshik Sutra, this Vyapti is not there. In Vaisheshik, we have something named Prasiddhi Purvakatva, which is preceded by familiar, well-known connection, which is the sort of looser way of saying that we already know that these two go together. Later, Nyaya formulated the theory of Vyapti, and early Vaisheshika is a bit more informal idea that cause and effect must be known to be connected. Then we have uh, a a discussion on Pramanas, Shabd and Upman. Shabd, which is the testimony. Vaisheshik Sutra does not list Shabd as a separate Praman. It also doesn't deny it. It simply assumes authority of the Veda, but it doesn't give Shabd its own place in the list of Pramanas. And Nyaya Sutra, it explicitly counts Shabd as uh, a Praman, and it defines it broadly as the testimony of a trustworthy person, not just the Vedas. Vatsayan, who was a Nyaya commentator, even, this is a very interesting tidbit that even an Mlech, so Arya, who is the Orthodox, and even a Mlech or a foreigner can be a trustworthy person. So Nyaya makes testimony a general epistemic category, and Vaisheshik only tacitly accepts the Veda's authority. Then in Upaman, so in Nyaya, Upaman is a independent pramana. So it refers to knowing something to similarity. For instance, Gavaya is like a cow. But in the Vaisheshik Sutra, Upman is not at all mentioned. So early Vaisheshik doesn't have a separate doctrine of analogy, as a praman or as a source of knowledge. Nyaya Sutra, seems to know the names of other pramanas which are used in Mimamsa. Example, Arthapatti, Sambhava, Ahitya, which is presumption, or Sambhava is from the greater to the smaller. Atiha is the tradition. Nyaya doesn't treat them as separate. It sort of subsumes them under the whole Pramanas. It tells that Arthapatti, Sambhava, Ahitya are basically the forms of inference or testimony. Vaisheshik doesn't mention it at all. Early Vaisheshik essentially used perception plus inference, and Veda was in the background. And Nyaya develops a more articulated epistemological list. Then Then how is abhava mentioned? So abhava is the perception of negation. Both systems accept a non-existence or abhava, but they articulate its epistemology in different fashions. Uh, in Vaisheshik, we perceive negation by perceiving the locus, or locus is the place where something would be, and not perceiving the thing itself. Thus, when we see an empty table, we perceive the table and the absence of pot on it. And Nyaya Sutra accepts that absence, non existence is perceived. So it explicitly says things like non existence can be directly perceived. So, you see the difference? Vaisheshik will claim that we perceive something is not there by first seeing the place where it should have been there, and then we don't see that thing here. So we perceive the table and the absence of the pot on it. But Nyaya says that we directly perceive the non-existence of the thing. So non-existence can be directly perceived. And then Nyaya turns it into a distinct category, abhav with subtypes, and it gives a more granular or fine-grained logic of negation than the what earlier Vaisheshik texts gave. Then in categories and senses, Vaisheshika's main concern is with categories or dravya, guna, karma, vishesha, samvaya. That is the backbone of the text. And Nyaya Sutra says nothing about the categories in the same systematic way. The focus is on Praman, debate, and self-liberation. And on the senses, Nyaya makes, a lot of efforts to prove that senses are material organs and made of elements. Vaisheshika also assumes this, but it doesn't treat it as a major debated topic. It only gives a short reference, and that doesn't show any controversy over this point, at least between the two schools. And when we come to Ishvara, Vaisheshik doesn't mention Ishwar by name. It explains words by atoms, adrast, adharm, but no personal creator. But in the Nyaya Sutra, Ishwar has been brought in explicitly when we discuss the fruits of karma or ordering of the world or eschatology, which is a more formal word for this. So Nyaya is explicitly theistic, while early Vaisheshika is, not. Then we have ways of defining liberation. Both the systems accept atoms and salvation, but they emphasize different aspects of it. Vaisheshika calls salvation nishrayas or moksha, which is the permanent cessation of connection with body. And Nyaya calls it apvarg, which is the cessation of pain. Basically, the same state defined in two ways. Vaisheshik focuses on metaphysical disconnections from body, and Nyaya focuses on psychological absence of suffering. In atomic structure, both of them admit the existence of atoms, but more detailed theory of atomic structure, we will see how atoms form dyades, triads, molecules, how heat changes the color in molecules. They belong to later Nyaya Vaisheshik. It's not there in the sutras. Then the theory of number in Sankhya. So Vaisheshikas were said to. So theory of this is not the Sankhya as in the Sankhya philosophy. This is number Sankhya, theory of number. Vaisheshika were said to hold a special procedure that first there is cognition of some object, then there is a notion of oneness, following which there is a notion of two-ness, and then there is a notion of two things. But Nyaya followed a different analysis. Then we have the change of color under heat, which is the Pilupaka doctrine, Pilupaka. In Vaisheshik, uh, it was thought that qualities change first in atoms and only then in aggregates. And the later Nyaya viewpoint is slightly different, which we'll see in detail. So mostly, but Nyayas are silent on these topics, right? So we cannot be sure that much difference existed in early Nyaya versus early Vaisheshika, but later the disagreements really came into picture. If we treat them together, we should just treat them as one joint system with small internal variations. Uh, so that is the way we should proceed forward with these two systems of thought. Just treating them together, for they have only minor variations, which we talked about in this.